James stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the woman who had once been his everything. 10 years of pain, of unanswered questions, had led to this moment. "Why now, Janet?" he asked, his voice thick with a mix of disbelief and lingering hurt. "Why come back after all this time? After everything?" Dr. James and Janet once had it all. At least it seemed that way. They lived in a small, cozy home on a quiet street, surrounded by their 5 children: Kara, Kenny, Kira, Killy, and little Caitlin. The walls of their house echoed with laughter, love, and the comforting sounds of a family united. James was a clinical psychologist, a calm and thoughtful man who spent his days helping others unravel their deepest struggles. Janet, on the other hand, was a driven and ambitious realtor who worked tirelessly to secure deals, climb the corporate ladder, and make a name for herself. Together, they built a life. Their careers were flourishing, their children thriving, and their love seemed unshakable. The future appeared bright, and nothing could have prepared them for the storm that was about to hit. One evening, after a long day at work, Janet came bursting through the front door, excitement radiating from her. "James, James," she called out, her eyes shining. She had just received a huge promotion, one that would significantly boost her salary. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the moment she could finally relax and stop worrying about the financial strain that had been looming over them. But as she shared the news, her joy quickly turned to unease. James wasn't thrilled. His expression hardened, and his voice, usually so calm and reassuring, took on an edge of frustration. "You should not expect me to take on all the bills now that you've been promoted," James said, the words coming out sharper than he intended. "We're in this together, Janet. That's how it should be." Janet blinked, taken aback by his reaction. She had expected him to celebrate with her, not to criticize. "I'm doing the best I can," she snapped, her voice rising. "You don't understand what it's like out there, what I have to do every single day. I've been working my butt off for this promotion, and now all I hear is that I'm supposed to carry even more of the weight. You're not the one dealing with the pressure of 1,000 clients, of constant rejection, of endless demands. We're not managing this right, James." Her words hit him hard, like a punch to the chest. The reality was that both of them had been carrying too much for too long. The bills piled up month after month, despite their best efforts. They were doing everything they could, but it was never enough. They had borrowed against their future, drained their savings, and now even their hard-earned promotions couldn't save them. The tension simmered between them as they faced their harsh truth. It wasn't just the money, it was the exhaustion, the unspoken expectations, and the feeling that they were both drowning under the weight of it all. The situation took a turn for the worse when the landlord arrived at their door the very next day. The letter in his hand was crisp, a clear and cold reminder of their financial struggles. Unpaid rent or eviction. The words felt like a punch in the gut. They had only a few days to pay, or they would lose everything: their home, their stability, their security. "I'm doing everything I can," Janet said, her voice tight with panic. "I swear, James, I don't know what else to do." James stood in silence, his heart heavy with the weight of the choices they had made. "I know, Janet," he said quietly, "but we can't keep doing this. We can't keep pretending that everything's okay." The argument that followed was ugly. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about their relationship, their expectations of each other, their dreams and disappointments. They were two people lost in their own worlds, unable to meet each other halfway. That evening, after the tension had reached its peak, Janet packed her things. She didn't say goodbye, not properly anyway. She simply left. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tearful apology, just the quiet sound of her footsteps echoing through the empty halls as she walked out of the door. James was left standing in the doorway, staring at the empty space where his wife had once stood. He couldn't comprehend what had just happened. In one moment, everything he had worked for, everything they had worked for, crumbled. And yet, he had no choice but to carry on. The next morning, James woke up to find their 5 children standing in front of him, faces full of confusion, concern, and unspoken questions. They didn't understand what had happened, why their mother had left. They only knew that life as they knew it had changed forever. Kara, the oldest, was already trying to take on the role of caretaker, though she was still just a young girl. Kenny, her younger brother, looked up to her with the same steady gaze James had once held, full of responsibility. Kira, Kelly, and Caitlin were too young to fully grasp the gravity of the situation, but they felt the absence of their mother in a way that pierced James's heart. As James looked at his children, he felt a mix of determination and overwhelming sadness. Janet had left, but he wasn't going to let their family fall apart. He would do whatever it took to raise them, to keep them safe, and to give them the love and security they deserved. The next few months were difficult. James juggled multiple jobs, often working late into the night to make ends meet. The days stretched on, and the house that was once filled with laughter now felt silent and empty. But despite the heartache, the bond between James and his children grew stronger. They had to rely on each other, and in doing so, they formed a bond that no one could break. As time passed, the pain of Janet's departure faded into something more manageable, but it never disappeared completely. Her absence became a part of their story, a constant reminder of what they had lost and what they had yet to rebuild. But through it all, James never gave up. He knew that even without Janet by his side, he would keep fighting for his children, for their future, and for the chance to create something better. 10 years had passed since Janet walked out the door, and life had been anything but easy for James and their 5 children. Each year felt like a battle, but James never wavered. He worked tirelessly to keep his family afloat, taking on multiple jobs while his children grew, each one forging their own path toward success. Though the wounds of Janet's departure never fully healed, the strength that emerged from the struggle created a resilience that no one could have predicted. Kara, the oldest, had blossomed into a young woman of exceptional talent. From the moment she had taken an interest in cooking, her father had seen her passion ignite with an intensity that mirrored his own determination. She worked relentlessly to earn a spot at the prestigious Culinary Institute of America. It wasn't easy. There were countless hours spent in kitchens, countless sacrifices, but Kara never gave up. And now, as a graduate, she was making waves in the food world. Kara had even had the honor of cooking for presidents at a high-profile event, a feat that filled James with an overwhelming pride. He had watched his little girl grow from a curious child into a skilled, confident chef, carving a name for herself in a world that had once seemed so far beyond their reach. Kenny, the only boy, had stepped into a role far beyond his years. With his sisters needing extra care and attention, he took it upon himself to protect and provide for them in whatever way he could. He wasn't just a big brother, he was their protector. Whether it was fixing things around the house, mowing the lawn, or lending a listening ear, Kenny always put his family first. He had inherited his father's steady nature, and though he wasn't yet an adult, he carried himself with the strength of one. James couldn't help but marvel at how much he had grown, how the boy who had once looked up to him now stood beside him as an equal, offering his strength and wisdom. Kara, the second oldest, had developed an immense passion for art. Her room was a small gallery, with canvases scattered everywhere, each one an expression of her heart. Kira's drawings, paintings, and sculptures told stories of a young girl who had faced hardship but channeled that pain into something beautiful. Her talent was undeniable, and though she hadn't yet found her place in the professional art world, James knew that she was destined for greatness. Her creativity was a gift not just to her family, but to anyone who came across her work. Kelly, the 4th child, had turned to writing as an outlet for her emotions. Her talent for storytelling was unparalleled, and she wrote with a depth that belied her years. James often found her sitting in a corner of the house, scribbling down her thoughts, her stories, her dreams. She had a way of weaving words together that captured the essence of life's most complicated moments. Her words could make someone laugh, cry, and reflect, all in the span of a few paragraphs. James knew that she would one day publish books that would resonate with people all over the world. And then there was Caitlin, the youngest, whose compassion and empathy shone through in everything she did. She had always been drawn to helping others, and as she grew older, she found herself captivated by the idea of becoming a doctor. She volunteered at local clinics, helped care for sick neighbors, and took every opportunity to learn more about the human body and how to heal it. She had a quiet determination about her, a resolve that was rooted deep within her soul. James couldn't be prouder of the woman Caitlin was becoming, the one who would one day make a difference in the lives of so many. Though each of them had found their way and excelled in their own right, there was an undeniable emptiness that lingered in the house. Janet's absence was still felt in the small moments, the spaces at the dinner table, the quiet absence in family photos, the empty seat at birthdays and holidays. The children had grown into remarkable individuals, and yet they couldn't help but feel the ache of their mother's departure. James had never remarried. His love for Janet had been fierce, and though the pain of her leaving had carved deep scars, he had never considered anyone else. There were moments when he found himself wondering what their life would have been like if she had stayed, if they had worked through the struggles together. But those thoughts were fleeting, overshadowed by the reality of raising 5 children on his own. His children had forgiven Janet. They understood, in their own way, the complexities of life and love. But forgiveness did not erase the hurt. They had come to terms with it, had grown stronger and more resilient because of it, but the hole in their family remained. No one spoke of it, not directly, but they all knew it was there. The absence of Janet lingered in every corner of their home, in every laugh shared around the dinner table, in every milestone they achieved without her. Still, despite the pain, they had come together in ways that Janet might never have imagined. They were a family, one that had been broken, but one that had healed in its own way. And as they each took on the world, they carried a piece of their mother with them, wondering if one day she would return to see the incredible people they had become. The day Janet knocked on the door, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. James was in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove, when the sudden sound of someone clearing their throat broke the quiet rhythm of the house. He froze, feeling an odd lump in his throat. He wasn't expecting anyone. His heart raced, and before he could think, he walked toward the door. When he opened it, he saw her. Janet. Her face was older, worn by time and hardship. The woman who had once been vibrant and full of confidence now seemed fragile, uncertain. Her hair was thinner, streaked with gray, and her eyes, those eyes that used to be full of fiery ambition, were now clouded with regret. Janet stood there, her shoulders hunched, as though the weight of the years had crushed her spirit. I need to talk," she said, her voice soft and shaky. James stood frozen, staring at her. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. His mind spun in 1,000 directions. It had been 10 years. 10 years of silence, of heartache, of unanswered questions. 10 years since she had walked away without a word, without even a glance back. Why was she here now? What had happened to her? Before he could find his voice, there was a movement behind Janet. Kara stepped forward, her eyes wide in shock. She had been visiting James for the weekend, but now, standing in the doorway, the air seemed to still around her. Her gaze shifted from Janet to her father, her heart heavy with confusion. "Mom," Kara whispered, her voice trembling. She wasn't sure if she could trust her own words. She had dreamed of this moment, dreamed of seeing her mother again, but the reality of it felt surreal. How could Janet just appear after everything that had happened? After all the pain and the years without her? Janet looked at Kara, and the brokenness in her eyes was undeniable. She hadn't expected this, didn't know how to fix the wreckage she had caused. Her hands trembled as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've made so many mistakes," she said, looking around the room at her children. the ones she had abandoned. I lost everything. My job, my home, everything. I was wrong to leave. I never should have hurt you. I'm so sorry. The word hung in the air, heavy with sorrow. Janet's apology was raw, but it was more than just words. It was a confession, a cry for redemption. The years had torn her down in ways no one could have imagined. The woman who had once stood proud and unyielding was now broken, humbled by life's unforgiving lessons. She had come to realize the cost of her departure, the cost of abandoning her family. She had thought leaving would give her space to rebuild, to fix things. But life had other plans. Kara stood still, her chest tight as she fought to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. She had spent years dreaming of this moment, the moment when her mother would come back, apologize, and they could somehow go back to being a family. But now that it was happening, she didn't know what to feel. Anger, pain, confusion. It all swirled within her. The years without her mother had shaped her into someone who didn't know how to reconcile the woman standing in front of her with the memories of the woman who had walked away. James, too, was frozen. He had raised their children alone. He had been the father, the mother, the provider, the protector. He had done everything for them, and he had never asked for anything in return. The years had been hard, but they had also shaped him into a stronger, more resolute man. And now, here was Janet, standing in front of him, asking for forgiveness. But could he forgive her? Could he forget the pain of watching her leave them behind? Could he simply let go of the anger that had festered for so long? The room was thick with tension. No one spoke for a long time. The children stood behind Kara, unsure of what to do, unsure of what to say. Could they trust her again? Could they open their hearts to the woman who had left them when they needed her most? Finally, it was Kara who broke the silence. Her voice was soft, but filled with the years of hurt she had carried. "You left us, Mom," she said, her eyes now filling with tears she could no longer hold back. "You left us when we needed you. Do you know what that did to us? To me." Janet's eyes filled with tears, her heart breaking at the pain in Kara's voice. She had no defense, no excuses. All she had were the apologies that had been too long coming. "I know," Janet whispered, her voice cracking. "I know, and I will never forgive myself for it. I can't undo the past. I can't take away the hurt I caused, but I can beg for your forgiveness. If you'll let me, I want to make things right. I want to try." Kara shook her head, her tears streaming down her face. She was angry, but there was something else, something deeper. She wasn't sure if she could forgive her mother. She wasn't sure if it was even possible. But what she did know, deep down, was that it wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about moving forward. And right now, she wasn't sure how to do that. Janet stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do next. She had come back, and in doing so, she had opened old wounds, wounds that would take time, perhaps years, to heal. Would they ever forgive her? Could they ever see her as their mother again? The question hung in the air as they all waited, unsure of what would come next. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Janet worked to prove herself. She found herself doing anything she could to regain a place in her family's life. The first few days after her return had been awkward, filled with long silences and careful, tentative interactions. But Janet wasn't giving up. She knew that action spoke louder than words, and she needed to show her children, especially Kara, that she was truly sorry for the years she had abandoned them. She took on any job she could find, cleaning houses, waiting tables, doing administrative work, whatever it took to make ends meet. She didn't ask for a single thing from her children, except for a chance to earn back their trust. She didn't want handouts or sympathy. She wanted to prove that she was worthy of being part of their lives again. But even as she worked tirelessly to make a living, she couldn't ignore the walls her children had put up. It hurt to see them hesitant, to feel the emotional distance between them. They were forgiving in their way, but their hearts hadn't yet fully healed. Kara, in particular, had the hardest time. The rawness of the years without her mother ran deep. She had grown up with the pain of Janet's sudden departure, of watching her father bear the weight of raising them alone. Kara had become a fierce and independent woman, strong and unyielding, but the wound of her mother's absence was still too fresh. The bond she had once shared with Janet was a distant memory now, clouded by the hurt of abandonment. But Janet didn't stop. She didn't try to rush Kara or push her into forgiveness. Instead, she quietly worked, proving her commitment by showing up every day, no matter how hard it was. And bit by bit, the walls around Kara's heart began to soften, as though the years of pain were being chipped away with each act of kindness, each humble gesture. It was Kara, of all people, who eventually helped bridge the gap. One evening, Kara invited Janet to one of her prestigious cooking events. It was an important dinner with a group of influential guests, and Kara had worked tirelessly to create a menu that would showcase her skill and passion. It wasn't just another meal. It was her moment to shine. But more than that, it was a chance for Janet to see who Kara had become. Janet had been invited, of course, but she wasn't sure she belonged there. She had spent years away, missing out on her children's growth. She had missed watching Kara blossom into the incredible woman she was now. As Janet entered the kitchen, she watched her daughter move with grace and confidence, preparing delicate dishes with care and precision. Kara's hands worked as if they were an extension of her heart, each movement deliberate, each dish a piece of her soul. Janet could hardly believe how much her daughter had grown, how far she had come. She realized with a sharp clarity that Kara had become the woman she was not because of her mother's absence, but in spite of it. And that realization hit her harder than any moment before. She had left her family, thinking that she could rebuild her life. But in return, her children had found their own strength. They had flourished in ways she hadn't expected, and they had done it without her. That night, Kara's dish was flawless, the best she had ever made. As the guests savored each bite, Kara took a moment to glance at her mother, who sat quietly at the table, her eyes filled with emotion. Kara gave her a small, knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes. It was a moment of peace, a small but significant step in the journey toward forgiveness. Janet could feel the weight of her years of regret as she watched her daughter. She realized how much time had been lost, how many opportunities had slipped away. But in the midst of her sorrow, something began to shift inside her. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to heal the wounds she had caused. Forgiveness wasn't easy. Janet had learned that over the years, but it was possible. And with every little act of love, with every tear shed, with every moment of humility, it seemed that they could find their way back to one another. As the evening came to a close, Janet walked up to James. She took his hand in hers, the hand that had held their family together for so many years, and whispered, "Thank you for waiting for me. I never thought I'd deserve it, but you gave me a second chance." James didn't speak at first. He only smiled at her, his eyes soft with the years of waiting, the years of pain. There was so much unsaid between them. But in that moment, it didn't matter. He had always believed in her. And now, in some quiet corner of his heart, he knew that she was finally home. "I always believed in you," he replied softly, his voice thick with emotion. And then, in the warmth of their quiet kitchen, with the smell of freshly prepared meals lingering in the air, something beautiful happened. The family, once torn apart by pain and loss, was whole again. The journey to forgiveness was long and filled with struggles, but they had made it. They were no longer defined by the hurt that had once divided them. They had come together in a new way, stronger and more united than ever. And for the first time in years, they sat together at the table, not as a broken family, but as one that had been rebuilt, piece by piece, with love, patience, and the promise of a better tomorrow. Forgiveness isn't always easy, but it's through our struggles that we find the strength to rebuild what we've lost. Janet's journey back to her family proves that even after years of pain, there's always a chance to heal and start anew. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others. Because sometimes the stories we need to hear are the ones that remind us of the power of second chances.